that I am from New York, so I automatically speak really quickly, and I'm going to try. So is there a clicker? Oops, sorry. So we're going to try to work with the clicker, and if it works, great. Okay, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, that's okay too. So we've got, so I think, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here and for showing up on this really beautiful night. It means a lot to me. Part of my family's not from Charleston, but my mom's from Clarendon County, South Carolina, so I do feel a connection to this place and for many different reasons, but I do appreciate you even having me here. But what I want to talk to you about really, sort of stems from, I think, the work that brought everybody here. I think everybody ultimately wants to live a thriving, wonderful life, in a place that feeds them in all sorts of ways, i.e. sustainable, right? I get that. But think about, and go with me on this, how many companies and corporations work to really retain the talent that they have. I think in particular, tech companies were really kind of made news when they would talk about the kind of things that they would do to keep the talent that they had. Everything from, offering their people a day of the week to work on their own passion projects, to, offering snacks, extraordinarily substantial snacks, the kind of benefits you just be great, ping pong tables in the hallway. So all of those type of things were the kind of things that made folks go, oh, they really appreciate their talent. But these companies kind of knew they needed to compete for talent, but imagine if we actually use that same kind of talent retention strategies in communities around the country, in particular low status communities. And by low status, what I mean, those are the communities where there are plenty of environmental burdensome facilities, where the air is generally dirtier, where the health outcomes are much lower, where educational attainment is also lower as well. The schools are worse. The parks, if they do exist, are not as well maintained, or there's just less of them to begin with. And elected officials generally will acknowledge all of these things to be true, but they're still the same campaign promises the next election. And low status communities are those places where inequality is assumed, both inside and outside of the community. And I just want to be clear, when I say low status communities, I'm not just talking about inner city ghettos. I'm talking about the kind of, post-industrial towns, that actually have seen better days, and now most of the folks are unemployed and they're all white. I'm talking about Native American reservations and everything associated, all of those things, many different colors, but they have the low status involved. So, but if we look at those low status communities as if they were those as corporations, and made it our business, thank you, to keep the talent from leaving, we would have a very different social and economic landscape in American low status communities here today. Instead, we have this thing called what I call a failure retention model, and well-intentioned efforts of activists, social service providers, philanthropy, and of course our government often serve to repel talent from those communities. Because when we surveyed people back in my own neighborhood about, they were 20s and their 30s, they were the folks that were about to graduate from college or actually graduate from high school. And it's of note, in my neighborhood, this was probably the last 5 years where we've had more young people graduating high school and that were actually college bound than we've had in more than 30 years. So it was huge for us. But when you'd ask those same kids, oh, so what do you think the community that you live in right now needs? And they would all repeat this thing. Oh, we need more community centers, and we need more programs, and we need more health clinics, and we need more affordable rental housing. And then we'd ask them, so after you graduate high school, college, and get yourself a good job, are you planning on moving to a neighborhood like that? And they were like, hell no. Why would I do that? I'm gonna have a life that where I can go to the kind of places I wanna go to and live in a place that's really exciting and extraordinary. And they wanted to go to places that actually had never heard of community centers or youth programs. They wanted to have fun because they looked at those things as markers of poverty. And honestly, as a developer, I know that it's the folks that are working in the subsidized affordable housing industry, they know that for the lowest income levels, there's always an enormous amount of money to be made by doing those projects. It's a very lucrative gig, but it also entrenches a transient and landless class in low status communities. They're essentially, if you use that, the community as corporation kind of thing, they are the equivalent of low wage hourly workers. But if we think of investments in those same people, in their future wealth generating capacity with housing and business development that address aspirations for their lives, complete with the kind of lifestyle infrastructure such as nice cars and bars and restaurants, and as well as home ownership and business development supports for those same people, that kind of stuff are like stock options to them that help them in their future individual and growth capacity as well. So in that case, individual community success equals individual success to those same hourly wage workers. But currently, in those low status communities, individual success leaves as soon as possible for the most part. You know, those young, talented, hardworking kids in those communities are led to believe from the time they're really little that they need to measure success by how far they get away from those communities. And when we lose those people in those communities, they lose the day-to-day consumer dollars that will allow better businesses to grow. They lose those everyday aspirational examples of success, making it harder to teach the next generation what success could look like in those same communities. They lose the reinvestment capital in the family home that their dad was able to buy, in my case in the 1940s, you know, whatever it was, and when they sell it, they eliminate that opportunity to pass down future wealth to their kids, so on and so forth. But I have noticed within the nonprofit industrial complex, there is this sort of somewhat distasteful attitude toward people in low status communities creating and retaining wealth. And as if they're somehow not authentic. And you know, why is it that we equate poverty with authenticity in low status communities? Like as if needy equals unsuccessful, and that's basically all you're ever going to be. And so we have to account for that as opposed to thinking of people as full individuals that just have given an opportunity and resources to actually grow and develop socially, environmentally, and economically. They will. And you know, so we saw the problem of status quo development, and as part of my consulting practice, and I am a practitioner more than anything, I launch ideas in context. So I wanted to broaden the idea of who can and should do development and expand an approach that creates the kind of reasons for the kind of emotional and economic wealth creation in low status communities that's designed to retain the talent that's in it and not repel it. And so now let's see if you can see anything. Ta-da! Maybe not. Well, I don't know, this isn't working. So, but I can, if it's not, if you can, don't worry about it. So, listen, bottom line is I grew up in a neighborhood that was literally by, okay, so I'll try it. And if you can see it, great. If not, that's okay. I grew up in a community that was literally like a postcard example of how to repel talent. A textbook example of how to repel talent, because it was literally on fire when I was growing up. I was born in '66, and by the late '60s and '70s, literally the South Bronx was like on the front page of many New York of national papers as the poster child for urban blight, because of the kind of financial disinvestment that impacted us and many urban areas around the country. There was no kind of capital coming in, in the form of loans of anywhere, and so landlords were torching those homes, for insurance money, because there was no way they were going to be able to actually get loans in their spaces. So it actually did kind of look like a war-torn space after World War II, like literally parts of Europe. That's what our community kind of looked like. And so seeing that, what it did was, the walk to work community that my father came to, that actually had residential and industrial, that people literally walked to work to have like thriving manufacturing jobs. Those things were gone, and what took the place was the type of environmental burdens from waste facilities and power plants, sewage sludge pelletizing plants. All those things were coming and literally filled the vacuum that used to have job creating light manufacturing jobs in them. And that had, of course, an impact on the health of people within the community. And I grew up knowing that this is the place to get out of, because I was one of those smart little kids, that was taught to measure success by how far she should get away from it. And I was planning my own escape by the time I was 7. Watched the buildings on both ends of my block burn down, and people that I knew and loved were just gone. And it was just like, and my brother was killed at the end of the summer. Because there was gang violence around there at the time, and I was just like, I'm out. I used education to do so, but when I did come back home, and I only did because I was broke and needed a cheap place to stay when I was going to graduate school, which was the cheapest place was my parents' home. It was kind of like, this is such a defeat, and why am I back here? And I was like, oh, because I'm broke. But other than that, it was just like, to be back in the place that I fought so hard to get away from was because it felt like this stain all over my body, that here I was, a smart kid, and suddenly I had to go back there. But when I did come back home, and that's when I discovered that despite all of the environmental burdens that we were dealing with, our city and state were actually planning on building another huge waste facility that would have brought even more waste to our community, which was predominantly low income and people of color, Blacks and Latinos. And that's when I was just like, I could either pretend that I don't see this, or I can be a part of the change that's going to make it happen. And I ended up being part of that change, because in addition to actually focusing on how do we help our city create a more sustainable solid waste management plan, the other piece was how do we actually work with our community to build the kind of community that is worth fighting for and staying in. How do we do that? What kind of community do we really want? And that's when, we actually got an opportunity through a U.S. Forest Service, very small grant program, to literally work on actually helping to restore the Bronx River. And so some of these pictures will show, we got this little grant, and I literally found a dump that dead-ended, and it was a map city street that dead-ended at the Bronx River, one of the only true freshwater river in all of New York City. And we worked really hard to kind of get, whether it was through some volunteer works, but building partnerships with both people in government and folks also in the private sector to work to create, sort of like a beta version, so to speak, of a site that wasn't a dump anymore. I mean, just imagine there were weeds and piles of garbage piled over our head, 30 years being dumped upon by all sorts of folks into this place that was just sort of like a cute little spot. There was just like little willow trees and things like that. But then we were able to transform that in and of itself by getting a $3 million allocation for it to become the Hunts Point Riverside Park, like so beautiful that we won national awards. We actually, to my girl from Chicago over here, we actually beat out Millennial Park for a national award for excellence in urban design. Thank you very much. But seeing that kind of really fundamental change within our community, to have something that was literally nationally looked upon as something beautiful and just incredible and powerful, was something that we weren't expecting to see, within our community at all. And it really had an impact on the way people thought about themselves. Another thing that as we looked at, but what it did was actually give us something so beautiful to look at, and having it reflect back on us, it also sends a message, I think, to all those from outside the community that you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Like, we just proved that is what could happen. And so, but what was interesting is that I feel like the community itself did want to have a different image of itself. But a question that often comes to mind when we think about the sort of the nonprofit industrial complex and even government and how they think of low status communities, it's almost as if poverty is a cultural attribute. And, is it something that's actually worth preserving? Because in low status communities, we find that low income is often associated with neighborhood preservation, which we mistakenly equate with culture, as if to be, poor and needy is something that's just something that you will be for the rest of your life. And you know what? I have to, when we asked the question, not just to people from the, outside the neighborhood, but we asked the people who are living in the same community, is it a cultural attribute? What do you want, in your own community? What kind of neighborhood are you striving to be a part of? What do you want this neighborhood to be? And folks were just pretty, interestingly enough, said the same exact things that you would expect middle class people to say. They wanted the kind of places that made them feel good about being in their own neighborhood. They wanted things like the kind of cafes and shops and places where they spend their money that made them feel like whoever was selling it to them valued them. They wanted the kind of places. They wanted parks. They wanted open space. They wanted, housing that matched their income. They were really specifically clear that, the things that didn't come up on their list were things like community centers or the waiting rooms of health centers. Like, they wanted places to gather. And we thought that was a really, really interesting kind of space. Because when we thought about, if there is something, if there's commonality in terms of what middle or higher status people and lower status people want in their communities, but then you automatically sort of like takes you to the point of like people think about gentrification. If communities get better, what does that mean? And we know that and so what we noticed was that there are two kinds of real estate development in low status communities, and that's, we think, is true. One is your typical gentrification, and where there's like speculators will look inside a community that's low status and then eventually either buy off the people that are there, or the poor folks will eventually be pushed out anyway. But there's another kind that we call poverty level economic maintenance, and that's the kind of thing where there's money being made, lots of money, but it all goes out of the community and it's not for the people that are in that community. So do you find, there's plenty of places to buy food, but is it like the healthy and affordable food that you want to see in your community? Probably not. If you have opportunities to buy anything, are the businesses that are in there actually supplying the things that you want to spend money on? Or are they the type of things that make you wish you could go to somebody else's neighborhood and buy in their stores? 99-cent stores and dollar stores, I get people want to bargain, but in many of these low status communities, that's all you'll find. And it tends to like wear upon people. There's often ways to either medicate or self-medicate. I've noticed that there's in low status communities, you'll always find lots of pharmacies for all the health related issues that are there. And you'll also find lots of liquor stores and not much in between. If you want to actually protect and preserve your money in terms of financial institutions, you're not going to find credit unions and banks, but you will find payday loan centers.